Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast foreign editor Christopher Dickey is back with us, as is Judah Grunstein, editor-in-chief of World Politics Review. Mark Dean, news reporter at Bloomberg News, and Julia Wono of Internet Without Borders. We were talking just before the break about the French presidential election campaign, the man who had been the runaway frontrunner, the former conservative Prime Minister François Fillon. He's been in hot water now for 2 weeks over Penelope Gate, the vast sums of money paid to his wife and 2 of his children over a long period of time as parliamentary assistants. Of course, they're still looking for proof that they actually did any proper work, Judah Grunstein.
To me, there are 2 scandals here. There's this political scandal in terms of Fillon, who is, I think, probably most angry at the fact that he's getting pinched for something that everyone does. And the second scandal is a national scandal in the sense that he's right. Everything he did is perfectly legal. It's legal
if the work was actually
if the
done.
work is done.
Yeah.
But even so, the entire arrangement is so tempting for abuse that it shows in some ways the sort of retrograde approach that France has to corruption. We saw last year or the year before the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister Manuel Valls. He flew his 2 sons to Germany for the finals of the Champions League finals in the state airplane. There was a huge outcry. He apologized. He paid for the tickets, and that was it. In a country in Northern Europe, for instance, he would have been run out of office. In Germany, they resigned for having plagiarized their doctoral thesis from 20 years before, if it's discovered. In France, you can pretty much get away with it because there's this sense that he's a good person, so we'll trust him.
Can you still get away with it, Mark Dean?
No, times are changing, and Fillon is caught in this precisely because he's been in politics all his life since the early 80s, and he's running for president at a time when A, these things get out, and B, it's no longer acceptable. He acknowledged it himself. Times are changing, and it's important. I think it's not so much, I think corruption is maybe a slight exaggeration in the sense that, the French elites are coddled, and that coddling of the elites is what makes people so angry. And this, in a way, I think is a tragedy, because whatever you think about François Fillon, this election is about Marine Le Pen. And this is exactly the sort of thing that is making her have a realistic shot.
All right, let's talk about Marine Le Pen. She not only won't pay back her own amounts, 300,000 euros she owes, for putting the likes of her bodyguard on her European Parliament payroll. She's even suing officials from the independent European watchdog that are docking her pay now.
The reality is that the European Parliament involves itself in matters that don't have any foundation. They can't even begin to prove their story, which is designed to hinder our cause. Why? Because we're fighting the EU, and they can't stand that. And we'll continue to do so, along with our assistants who are also politicians, because that's the mandate that we've given to our voters.
Julia Wono?
Yes, on Marine Le Pen. The thing that's very interesting on this is that finally she's been the one who's been claiming that the elite is corrupted in France. And finally she appears to be accused of doing the same things that she's been reproaching.
And by the way, in the case of the European Parliament, it is illegal to put your...
No question on that. And on that, one thing is very interesting is that she's complaining that there hasn't been any judiciary processes. Due process, indeed. But at the same time, her political party has been blocking the creation of a European prosecutor, financial prosecutor. That's a very interesting thing to mention. But again, on this debate of
But she seems to not, it doesn't seem to hinder her at all, the fact that she's taken the European Parliament's money and people on her staff stayed in Paris and did work that had nothing to do with the European Parliament.
Yes, well, we'll see if it won't hinder her. We've seen that the polls are not always to be trusted. But one last thing I would like to mention is that the issue of corruption within the French political elite is probably not so new, and is probably inherited from practices that have been happening elsewhere. I'm talking specifically about the France-Afrique network. We remember all these scandals of French politicians, including Le Pen family, being accused of going to Gabon, to Republic of Congo, and coming back with suitcases. Where does that money go when it's reinvested in the political party, but we don't know how? So these practices are not so new, and they're not specific to the Parti Les Républicains or to any other French political party. And that's very interesting, and we'll see how.
But what is new, Christopher Dickey, is perhaps the way that they can get their side of the story out. We talked in the first part of the show about Fillon chastising the press, Marine Le Pen defiant, saying that these institutions are illegitimate.
Yeah, well, I think you have to look at Le Pen and Fillon in rather different contexts. First of all, Le Pen was never running as a model of integrity. She's running on certain issues that are very important, having to do with immigration, Europe, against internationalism, cosmopolitanism, globalization, whatever the hell you want to call it. She's running against all that, and her core support, 30% of the French, that's why they support her. They don't really care about anything else. This was also true with Trump. His core support didn't care. It didn't matter what he did. They had faith in him, they worshipped him, and many of them still do. That's the way Le Pen's support is. That's not the way Fillon's support is. Fillon's support was a surprise to everybody. Nobody thought he'd be that popular. He came from way behind to take the primary in November. And a lot of his support was anti-Sarkozy. It was against somebody. It wasn't for him. So I think it's a very different context. Also, he ran then, he's running now as Mr. Integrity. So to say, well, times have changed, you know, gee, I've got integrity, but yeah, my family took $1 million from the state for doing nothing, doesn't look good.
There's two other aspects in terms of Fillon and Le Pen. The first is that the political optics for Fillon are bad because of what you just said, but also because of his political program, which called for cutting, I think, 500,000 public jobs at a time when it comes.
His family makes $1 million.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So right there, it looks really bad for him. And in a second round election where anyone who makes it through to face Marine Le Pen is going to need a significant amount of support from people who normally are political opposition. So any right or center-right candidate is going to need left-wing votes and vice versa. And so when you have a really aggressively conservative program like that and you're hypocritical about it, with Le Pen really quickly, I don't think this scandal hurts her at all with her base because it's Europe, it's the EU. She's already demonized the European Parliament. It's sort of a running joke that she participates in it at all. She's there to destroy it. So I don't think she suffers from it at all.
Marine Le Pen quoted as saying it's a plot by Martin Schulz. Martin Schulz is now the former president of the European Parliament. He's left, returned home to Germany, you might say to a hero's welcome, since he took the reins last month of the Social Democrats. That party's prospects have soared. They're getting their highest polling numbers in more than a decade. They find themselves rivaling Angela Merkel's CDU in the build-up to next September's elections.
The welcome here as elsewhere shows that the SPD has a chance. There is a sort of renaissance for social democracy in Germany.
All right, Martin Schulz speaking to our reporters there in French. Let me show you Mark Dean. This is the cover of Spiegel this week. Saint Martin, they're calling him. And a lot of the popularity we're seeing from Martin Schulz is also about this whole a backlash. People are describing it as a backlash against this populist wave.
Spiegel is certainly doing well with its covers recently, aren't they? But I mean, I think, I don't know if it's exactly the same thing. Angela Merkel is living on borrowed time. She's been in office over a decade now. We're in a modern media age where the public gets tired of seeing the same person all the time, and you know, the exposure is very hard to take. So I think that what we're seeing in the rallying around Martin Schulz is just a desire for change, classic, you know, in democracies, and we'll have to see what he's made of now. I mean, he seems to be a very strong politician, but he's coming from a very different place.
coming from a different place. Judah Grunstein?
It's, I'd say across the continent, it's pretty confused right now. I mean, you have the Social Democrats rising in Germany, but here in France, for instance, the Socialist Party had a very clear choice between a centrist Social Democrat type candidate in Manuel Valls and a more left-wing candidate in Benoît Hamon. And they very clearly chose, they chose Hamon. In the U.S., even the Democratic primary between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders showed that there's something out there that's resonating with both ideas, that you need a reasonable, reformist, politically practical approach, but there's also a lot of resonance for this sort of message that we need radical social welfare reform and radical social change. I'm not saying it's a winning, it obviously wasn't a winning formula for Sanders, but and I don't think it will be one for Hamon either, but you can't discount the fact that there's a lot of different sort of conflicting signals out there right now.
The amazing thing, sorry to jump in, but the amazing thing about Germany is to look at this is like an election out of the 1980s. You know, you've got someone reasonable on the right, someone reasonable on the left, all professional politicians, etc. It's very different than what we're seeing in France, what we're seeing in the US and the UK as well.
All right, let's get back to France, but a different story. 25 arrests overnight in a working-class suburb after another night of violence that followed last week's alleged assault of a 22-year-old resident of Aulnay-sous-Bois. 4 police have been charged with assault, one of the 4 for rape with a nightstick. Amateur video footage proving decisive in the case, and it's a story that's even prompted a bedside visit by the president of France. The victim, Théo, was seen by François Hollande, and also defending the youth in this story, the law and order conservative mayor of Aulnay-sous-Bois, Bruno Béchiza, a former cop close to the former president Nicolas Sarkozy, who surprised many by rushing to the defense of Théo and echoing the victim's appeal for calm.
I'm calling again for a return to calm and decency. It's a question of respect. Respect for the victim, Theo. Respect for his family. Respect for the pain and emotions of the inhabitants of Aulnay.
Many people surprised at seeing this former cop, in this particular case, siding with the victim.
Yeah, but François, they're terrified. This is exactly the kind of incident that can ignite explosions all over the country. Everybody remembers 2005, the fall of 2005, where you had 2 young men who were fried fleeing from the cops. They went into an electric transformer and they were electrocuted, and the country exploded. How many calls did I get? Is Paris burning? And the answer was, yeah, outside of Paris, it's burning like hell. The whole country was in flames. All the banlieues, all of these ex-urban places where people have been pushed out to live, exploded. That's exactly what they're worried about now. That's why Hollande goes and stands by his bedside. That's why a former cop says, yes, we got to worry about the victim. Also, you know, there's some preposterous stuff coming out here. The lawyer for the cop who's accused said that somehow he accidentally raped this guy with a baton, and the guy's got in hospital. It's clear he's seriously injured. There's no allegation here. He was assaulted. Was it more intentional, less intentional? The heat of the moment. He was seriously injured, and there's no way to get around that.
Is it? We've talked a lot about police violence in the United States. Is it the same in France, or is it different?
Unfortunately, recent examples suggest that there is also a police brutality problem which targets specific citizens of Paris, you know, even of France, urban cities. So there is, well, I will cite
racial profiling.
There is racial profiling. Many organizations have been doing a lot of statistics, despite the fact that ethnic statistics are forbidden by the Constitution. But nevertheless, associations have been doing so and have been proving that there is a racial problem within the police. And more importantly, these associations suggested during the presidential campaign in 2012 that the police, upon ID control of citizens, gives back a receipt to the person in order to ensure that the normal process, the control was normal. But this was not applied. It was promised by many candidates, including François Hollande, but never came into application.
What do you think of the political reaction we've seen to this case?
The political reaction is, François Hollande going straight to assist this young man is a powerful image. But at the same time, institutionally, it's like there is not a recognition of this problem. You mentioned Ziad and Bouna rightly. In justice, the policemen were
Acquitted.
Acquitted. Thank you. Despite the huge outcry against what happened, and despite what followed. And I would like to add also that there is this case of Adama Traoré, who was another young man who was killed 2 months ago now, I think. He died in police custody. And up until now, it's been very difficult for the prosecutor, for the judiciary, to admit that there had been a problem.
I was going to bring up the Traoré case because I think what Christopher said is right. The political reaction here isn't necessarily to the police brutality, even if people are outraged by it. The political reaction is to the immediate burning of cars and rioting the very night thereafter, 25 arrests generally per night since then, attacks and ambushes on police patrols in the neighborhoods. So, for instance, with Traoré, there were demonstrations, but they were peaceful, and they didn't sort of create this kind of anxiety. So.
Yeah, it's pretty damned ugly out there. I mean, let's also remember that 4 policemen were very seriously injured when a firebomb was thrown into their car. I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening in the banlieue that I think is very violent and very scary, and everybody who knows of the area feels it's on a knife's edge.
Let me bring you back, roll back the clock. 2002, at the time, the French Interior Minister is called Nicolas Sarkozy. He goes to Toulouse. There's a meeting with police, and they're stunned because he chastises them, saying it's great to organize rugby matches in working-class neighborhoods, but a cop's first job is to investigate and pursue crime, and he puts an end to community policing.
Yeah, well, that was a mistake, wasn't it? Because this is exactly where we've created a situation in France where there are no-go zones. There are places where they're not exactly the way they're described by the American right wing and Breitbart, but there are places where the police know that they are in danger when they go. I mean, my God, what goes on in Marseille, in the big projects in Marseille, is just unbelievable.
Sarkozy had bears a lot of responsibility for the deterioration of the situation, specifically for that kind of remark. You can't have law and order just by, having strong law enforcement.
No, in these neighborhoods, the French police have a relationship with the population similar to an occupying force to an occupied territory or to an occupied country, and that can never benefit in terms of policing or calm and peace in the neighborhood.
Before we go, Cameroon in the news this week. There was a good news story. Julia Wono, I'm sure you know, the heroes' welcome for the national football team. The indomitable Lions defeating Egypt 2-1, the final of the African Nations Cup. Congratulations.
Thank you. Very happy.
That was the good news story. The bad news story, a boycott of English of classes in English-speaking cities. Students joining a strike that was started 2 months ago by lawyers, teachers, protesting against their marginalization, they say, in the majority Francophone country. Protests that turned deadly at the time with a bloody crackdown, and prominent human rights activists charged with terrorism. 2 of Cameroon's 10 provinces are English-speaking, a throwback to the days when Britain and France had divided up the former German colony as parts of the spoils of victory in World War I. Why is it coming to a head right now, this Anglophone, Francophone divide?
Well, first of all, I would like to correct a little bit because I don't think, framing the issue only on the language aspect is the right way. Why? Because many of the complaints that have been voiced by either the lawyers and civil society organization later on are generally a complaint against bad governance in Cameroon, the fact that the central state has not been able to administrate the whole country.
Specifically things like sending English teachers who don't speak proper English.
Absolutely, or even not enforcing common law legislation in common law, country, in the part of the country that inherited from the system. So it's mainly a problem of not applying the Constitution and not applying not applying its obligations as a state. So, but the problem is that the issue of language has probably been catalyzed, but I wouldn't say it's the fact of the demonstrators. In my opinion, it's the fact of a crackdown, a huge crackdown, which has been going on since November 2016, as you mentioned, and which is even more important now with the digital divide, because since January 17th of this year, the Anglophone part of the country is completely cut from internet. So people cannot interact with the rest of the world, but most importantly, all the news on the repression that circulated. For instance, observers of France 24 did a great report on these students who demonstrated and who were beaten up, forcing the police to make some, a declaration on that, on what happened. And obviously, without internet, you can arrest lawyers and charge them with terrorism without, shocking anyone, and especially not shocking anyone in the Francophone part of the country. You can forbid citizen movements, and this, as a result, frustrates even more.
And becomes a vicious circle.
And becomes a vicious circle and transforms it into a language divide, which was not the case initially. Once again, those citizens are complaining of the same things that citizens in Francophone have been complaining. And one last thing, to show that the language divide is not real, is that Ondoa, who is the goalkeeper of the Cameroon team and who was, I think, the best player of the AFCON competition, he sent a message and said, "I love you, Bamenda. I grew up in Bamenda. I'm from my parents are from Yaoundé, and we love you, Bamenda, and we're all Anglophones." That's a reality for most of the citizens in Cameroon. They even created a language called French, Cam Franglais, which mixes both languages. So yes, it's not. For me, in the population, there is not a divide.
All right, the frustration is not necessarily a language when you're saying. Julia Wono, many thanks. I want to thank Judah Grunstein. I want to thank as well Mark Dean and Christopher Dickey, but stay with us.